The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched across half a kilometer, its curved walls displaying holographic maps of 1,000 star systems. And at its center stood Commander Xerax of the Velthari Empire, his scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights as he received his orders for expansion into the outer rim territories. He was tall even by Velthari standards, nearly 3 meters of muscle and bone, covered in dark green scales, and his yellow eyes scanned the assembled council members with barely concealed contempt. For the Velthari were conquerors who had crushed 17 civilizations beneath their clawed feet, and Xerax saw no reason to show respect to these soft diplomats who spent their days talking instead of fighting. "Commander Xerax," the elder council member Ambassador Morth began, his forearms folded across his chest as he spoke in a grave tone. "Before you depart for the outer rim, there is a mandatory warning that all military commanders must receive regarding a particular species in that region." Xerax flicked his tongue in annoyance, a gesture of dismissal among his people, and he crossed his powerful arms as he waited for the old fool to finish speaking. "The humans," Morth continued, "have established 3 colonies on the moons of the Kepler system, and the Galactic Council has issued a permanent directive that applies to all spacefaring civilizations without exception." "And what directive would that be?" Xerax asked, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "Do not attack them," Morth said simply. "Under any circumstances, for any reason, regardless of provocation real or imagined, you must never engage in hostile action against human vessels or human settlements." Laughter erupted from Xerax, a harsh barking sound that echoed through the chamber and drew uncomfortable glances from the other council members. And when he finally stopped, he shook his head in disbelief at what he had just heard. "You expect me to fear these humans?" he demanded. "I have studied their species, and they are weak creatures from a small planet at the edge of the galaxy, with soft skin that tears easily and bodies that break under pressure. And you tell me that the mighty Velthari should avoid them?" Morth's expression grew even more serious, and he reached into his robes to produce a small data crystal that glowed with a faint blue light. "This contains historical records from 50 years ago," the ambassador explained, "when the Corvan Empire made the same mistake you are considering. And I strongly advise you to review this footage before you make any decisions about the human colonies. The Corvan were fools," Xerax dismissed with a wave of his clawed hand. "Everyone knows they fell because of internal weakness, not because of anything these humans did to them. The Corvan attacked a single human mining outpost," Morris said quietly, "and within 1 standard year, their entire empire was reduced to ruins, with their home planet blockaded and their military completely destroyed. And I was there when their emperor begged for mercy at the end." Sub-Commander Tessic, who stood silently behind Xerax, felt a chill run down his spine at the ambassador's words. For he had heard whispers about the Corvan War, but had never learned the full truth. And something in Morth's eyes told him that the old diplomat was not exaggerating, but Xerax simply laughed again and pushed the data crystal back toward the ambassador. "Keep your propaganda," he said with contempt. "I have no interest in fairy tales designed to protect a weak species from their betters. And when I return from the outer rim with human slaves and human resources, perhaps then you will understand what true power looks like." Morris sighed heavily, the weight of centuries visible in his tired eyes, and he stepped back from the arrogant commander. "I have delivered the warning as required by council law," he said formally, "and I have offered you the evidence that supports it. So whatever happens next will be the consequence of your own choices." Xerax turned his back on the ambassador and strode toward the exit, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber as his officers fell into formation behind him. And Tessic paused for just a moment to look back at Morth, who simply shook his head with an expression of profound sadness outside the council chamber. The Valkyrie fleet waited in orbit around the neutral station Omnara. 12 massive warships bristling with weapons that had brought death to countless worlds. And as Zyrax boarded his flagship, he felt nothing but excitement at the conquest to come. Set course for the Kepler system, he commanded as he settled into his chair on the bridge, and prepared the troops for ground assault. Because we will take everything those humans have built and make them serve the glory of the Valkyrie Empire. Tessic stood at his station, his claws tapping nervously against the console as he processed what he had heard in the council chamber. And finally, he gathered enough courage to speak. "Commander," he said carefully, "perhaps we should at least review the data that Ambassador Morath offered, simply as a tactical precaution before we engage an unknown enemy." Zyrax turned his yellow eyes toward his second-in-command, and the cold fury in that gaze made Tessic take an involuntary step backward. "Are you suggesting that I should fear these creatures?" the commander asked in a dangerously quiet voice. "No, Commander," Tessic replied quickly. "I merely thought that additional intelligence about any enemy would be valuable. The humans are not enemies," Zyrax said dismissively. "They are prey, and the Valkyrie do not study prey. We simply hunt them and take what we want, so unless you wish to join them in chains, I suggest you keep your concerns to yourself." Tessic lowered his head in submission, but inside his mind, a small voice whispered that they were making a terrible mistake, a voice that would grow much louder in the days to come. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed, leaving Omnara behind as they traveled toward the Kepler system, toward 3 small human colonies that had no idea what was coming for them, and toward a future that would change the galaxy forever on the largest moon called New Haven. 8,000 humans went about their daily lives, farming the rich soil and mining the precious minerals beneath the surface. And among them was a man named Daniel Marsh, who kissed his wife Laura goodbye before heading to his office at the colony administration building. He had no way of knowing that in just 3 days, his peaceful world would burn, and that his death would set in motion a chain of events that would teach the entire galaxy why the warning about humans existed. 4. Humans were unlike any other species the Valkyrie had ever encountered, and the lesson they were about to learn would be written in fire and blood across the stars. The morning sun rose over New Haven Colony, casting golden light across the agricultural domes and the simple homes, where 8,000 humans had built their lives far from Earth. And Laura Marsh stood at her kitchen window watching her 2 children play in the yard while the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Her husband Daniel had left early for the administration building where he managed the day-to-day operations of the colony, and she smiled as she thought about the dinner they had planned for that evening, a celebration of their 10th wedding anniversary on this distant moon they now called home in the security center across town. Nathan Cole reviewed the morning reports with his team of 40 defense personnel, a small force equipped with basic weapons that were meant for wildlife control and emergency situations rather than military combat. And he had no reason to expect anything unusual on this quiet day. Claire Reyes was already at the medical facility, treating a farmer who had injured his hand while repairing equipment, and she hummed softly to herself as she worked, grateful for the peaceful life she had found after leaving the crowded hospitals of Earth behind. None of them saw the shadow that was coming. The first warning came at exactly 1100 hours, when the outer sensor station went dark, its signal cutting off mid-transmission, and Nathan felt his stomach drop as he stared at the blank screen where data should have been flowing. "Get me a visual on Sector 7, he ordered sharply, and when the image appeared on the main display, his blood turned to ice in his veins. 12 alien warships hung in the black sky above New Haven, their weapons already glowing with the terrible energy of orbital bombardment. And it was no time to think, no time to plan, only time to react. sound the evacuation alarm. Nathan shouted as he grabbed his weapon and ran toward the door. "Get everyone to the emergency shelters and launch the civilian shuttles immediately." The sirens began to wail across the colony, a sound that the colonists had only heard during drills. And for a moment, there was confusion as people looked up at the sky and tried to understand what was happening. Then the first plasma bolt struck the eastern agricultural dome, and the explosion sent flames and debris hundreds of meters into the air. And suddenly everyone understood that this was not a drill. Daniel heard the blast from his office and immediately activated the emergency communication system. His voice steady despite the fear that gripped his heart as he spoke to the entire colony. "All civilians proceed to evacuation points immediately," he announced. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Proceed to evacuation points and board the shuttle transports." He grabbed the emergency pack from his desk and ran toward his home, pushing through crowds of panicked colonists as more explosions rocked the ground beneath his feet. And all he could think about was reaching Laura and the children before it was too late. Laura had already gathered the kids when Daniel burst through the door. And for one precious moment, they held each other as the world burned around them. "The shuttle bay is 3 blocks north," Daniel said as he took his daughter's hand. "We need to move now." They ran through streets filled with smoke and screaming people, dodging falling debris as Valkyrie weapons continued to rain destruction from above. And Nathan appeared beside them with a group of security officers providing cover. "The shuttles are launching in 10 minutes. Nathan yelled over the chaos. "Keep moving." They reached the shuttle bay to find hundreds of colonists already crowding onto the transport vessels. And Daniel lifted his children into Laura's arms before turning back toward the colony. "What are you doing?" Laura cried out, grabbing his arm. "There are still people trapped in the eastern sector," Daniel said, his eyes meeting hers with a look of desperate determination. "I have to help them. Daniel, please." He kissed her one last time, a kiss that tasted of smoke and tears. And then he pressed something into her hand. A small data chip that contained everything he knew about the attacking ships from his years as a naval engineer. "Give this to whoever comes to find us," he said. "They will come, Laura. I promise you they will come." And then he was gone, running back into the fire to save whoever he could. The next 2 hours were a nightmare of death and destruction as the Valkyrie bombardment continued without mercy. And Daniel managed to lead 3 groups of survivors to the evacuation shuttles before a collapsing building blocked his path. Found himself trapped in the ruins with a dozen children from the colony school, their teacher dead beneath the rubble, and he held them close as he searched for another way out. Nathan found them just as a Valkyrie landing craft touched down nearby, and together they fought their way toward the last shuttle, carrying children in their arms as alien soldiers opened fire from behind. Plasma bolt caught Nathan in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. And Daniel turned back to help his friend, even as the shuttle pilot screamed at them to hurry. "Take the children," Daniel shouted as he dragged Nathan toward the ramp. "Get them out of here." He pushed Nathan onto the shuttle and handed the last child to the waiting arms inside. And then he turned to face the Valkyrie soldiers who were closing in, buying precious seconds for the shuttle to launch. The last thing Daniel Marsh saw was the shuttle rising into the sky, carrying his friend and a dozen children to safety. And he smiled even as the enemy weapons found him, because he knew that Laura and his children were already among the stars. The shuttle doors closed, and Nathan Cole screamed in rage and grief as he watched the colony disappear beneath them, flames consuming everything they had built as the Valkyrie ships continued their assault of 8,000 colonists. Only 2,000 escaped that day, and 300 more were captured by the invaders to be taken as slaves. But deep in the wreckage of the medical facility, an emergency beacon activated automatically, sending a signal across 50 light-years of space, a signal that contained coordinates and attacker. identification, and a number that would echo through the halls of power on Earth: 1,800 dead, 300 captured, and somewhere in the cold darkness between stars. That signal reached the ears of people who would not rest until justice was served in the council chamber on Amnara. Ambassador Morath received word of the attack and closed his eyes in sorrow, for he knew what was coming next. And he almost pitied the Velthari for the storm they had brought upon themselves. The humans were coming, and they would not stop until the end. The emergency beacon reached Earth Command Headquarters exactly 6 hours after the attack on New Haven. Its signal cutting through the vast distances of space to deliver news that would shake humanity to its core. And Admiral Grace Patterson stood frozen before the main display as she read the casualty report for the third time: 1,800 civilians dead, including women and children. 300 more taken prisoner by an alien force, identified as the Velthari Empire human colony, destroyed without warning or provocation. She was a woman of 60 years with silver hair and steel-gray eyes that had seen too many battles. And in all her decades of service, she had hoped never to see this particular alarm activated. But here it was, flashing red on every screen in the command center. "Get me confirmation on those numbers," she ordered. Her voice calm despite the cold fury building inside her chest. "Confirmed, Admiral," her aide replied. "We have matching reports from the survivor shuttles that reached the Kepler relay station. And one of the refugees has requested a direct communication with you. Put them through." The screen flickered to show a woman with haunted eyes and ash still clinging to her hair. And Admiral Patterson recognized the look of someone who had lost everything but refused to break. "Admiral, my name is Laura Marsh," the woman said. "My husband was the colony administrator of New Haven, and he died getting our people to safety. I am sorry for your loss." "Mrs. Marsh," Laura held up a small data chip, the same one Daniel had pressed into her hand before running back into the fire. "Before he died, my husband recorded detailed sensor data about the enemy ships," she explained. "Their weapons, their shield frequencies, their formation patterns, everything he could gather from his engineering background. And he told me to give this to whoever came to find us." Admiral Patterson leaned forward with sudden intensity. "Your husband was a naval engineer?" "He served 12 years before we moved to New Haven," Lavra confirmed. "And he never stopped thinking like one. So when the attack began, he started analyzing the enemy instead of just running." "Send that data immediately," the Admiral ordered. "And Mrs. Marsh, I want you to know something." "What is that?" "We are coming," Patterson said, and there was something in her voice that made even her hardened officers feel a chill. "And we will not stop until every prisoner is free, and every person responsible for this attack faces justice." She ended the communication and turned to face her command staff, all of whom stood at attention, waiting for orders they knew were coming. "Activate Protocol 17. Admiral Patterson announced. A heavy silence fell over the room, for everyone present understood what those words meant. Protocol 17 had been established after the Corvin War 50 years ago, when humanity had learned that mercy toward those who attacked civilians only invited more attacks. And its terms were simple and absolute. When Protocol 17 was activated, every human military vessel within operational range was obligated to join the pursuit of the attackers. And there would be no negotiation, no diplomacy, and no time limit on the operation, for the protocol remained active until the enemy was captured or destroyed. Whichever came first, within hours, the call went out across human space, reaching warships and patrol vessels and defense stations throughout the galaxy, and one by one they responded, changing course and converging on the coordinates where the Velthari fleet had last been detected. Captain Ryan Torres was commanding the heavy cruiser, relentless when he received the orders, and he gathered his crew in the main hangar to explain what was happening. Most of you have heard rumors about New Haven, he began, his voice carrying across the assembled sailors. So let me give you the facts. He told them about the attack, about the dead and the captured, about the cowardice of striking a civilian target without warning. And as he spoke, he saw the same cold anger building in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. We have been ordered to lead the pursuit fleet, Torres continued. And I will not lie to you about what that means, because some of us may not come back from this mission. But I'm asking you to follow me anyway. A young officer near the front raised her hand. Captain, how long will the pursuit take? However long it takes, Torres replied simply. Protocol 17 has no expiration date, and we will chase these creatures across every galaxy in the universe. If that is what it requires to bring our people home, there was no hesitation. No fear, only grim determination as the crew of the Relentless acknowledged their orders and returned to their stations over the next 48 hours. 17 human warships from different sectors converged on the rally point, and Captain Torres took command of the combined fleet as they began analyzing the data that Daniel Marsh had gathered before his death. His work is incredible, the tactical officer reported. He identified weaknesses in their shield harmonics and mapped their weapon recharge cycles. So we know exactly how to hit them and when. Torres nodded slowly, thinking about the man who had sacrificed himself to give them this advantage. Then let us make sure his death was not wasted. Meanwhile, the Valkyrie fleet had returned to their territory to celebrate their victory. And Commander Zyrax stood before the High Command, boasting about the wealth they had captured and the slaves they had taken. The human colonies are defenseless, he declared, and I recommend a full invasion force to claim the rest of their territory before they can organize a response. The High Command, equally arrogant and equally blind, agreed to mobilize additional fleets for the conquest. Only Sub-Commander Tessic remained silent, haunted by the memory of Ambassador Morath's warning. And later that night he retrieved a copy of the data crystal that Zyrax had refused to view. He watched the historical footage from the Corvan War, and what he saw made his blood run cold, because the Corvan had been a powerful empire with a mighty fleet, and the humans had dismantled them piece by piece over 12 months of relentless pursuit. When he tried to warn Zyrax the next morning, the commander responded by demoting him for cowardice and confining him to quarters. The humans are nothing, Zyrax insisted, and you will see the truth when we crush them completely. But even as he spoke those words, the pursuit fleet was already on the move, tracking the Valkyrie across the stars with a determination that the galaxy had rarely witnessed. Captain Torres stood on the bridge of the Relentless and watched the tactical display showing 17 ships in perfect formation. All vessels report ready. Captain, his first officer announced. Torres took a deep breath and gave the order that would begin the hunt. Take us in, and across the cold void of space, the predators became the prey. The hunt began in the darkness between stars, where the Valkyrie fleet fled toward their home territory, believing they had escaped the consequences of their attack. But they did not understand the nature of the enemy they had awakened, and they would learn that lesson through fire and blood. Captain Torres pushed his fleet hard across the first 3 systems, using tracking technology that the Valkyrie had never encountered before, and every time the enemy changed course, the humans anticipated their movements and cut them off. They cannot escape us, Torres told his crew, no matter how far they run or how fast they fly, because we know where they are going before they do. The first engagement came in the Nexar asteroid belt, where 4 Valkyrie warships had positioned themselves among the floating rocks to ambush the pursuing fleet. And Commander Zyrax watched flagship with confidence as the human vessels approached the trap. They walk into death like fools, he said with a cold smile. Fire all weapons when they reach the kill zone. But Torres had anticipated the ambush, And instead of flying into the trap, he split his fleet and flanked the enemy position from both sides, catching the Valkyrie ships in a devastating crossfire that turned their advantage into a disaster. 2 enemy vessels exploded within the first minute of combat, their shields overwhelmed by the precise attacks that exploited the weaknesses Daniel Marsh had identified. And a third ship lost power and drifted helplessly as its crew frantically tried to restore systems. The fourth ship fled, but a human tracking beacon attached itself to the hull, and there would be no escape. Zorak stared at his tactical display in disbelief as he watched his ambush fail completely. How did they know? He demanded. How could they possibly have known? Tessic, still confined to quarters, heard the alarms and felt no satisfaction in being right. Only a deep sadness for the lives that would be lost because of his commander's arrogance. The pursuit continued for 3 months across 4 galaxies. And with each passing week, the human fleet grew stronger while the Valkyrie forces weakened. Because every time Zorax called for reinforcements, the humans intercepted them before they could arrive. News of the hunt spread across the galaxy, and other species watched with a mixture of fear and dark satisfaction. For the Valkyrie had made many enemies during their centuries of conquest, and there was a certain justice in seeing them hunted by creatures they had dismissed as prey. Ambassador Morath received regular reports at the Galactic Council, and when Zyrax finally sent a desperate plea for intervention, the old diplomat simply shook his head. The Council warned you, he replied, and you chose to ignore that warning, so whatever happens now is the consequence of your own decisions, and we will not interfere. The communication ended, and Zyrax realized for the first time that he was truly alone during the second month of the pursuit. Lieutenant Maya Chen led a rescue team onto a damaged Valkyrie transport vessel that had been crippled in a skirmish, and what they found inside made even the hardened soldiers weep with rage. 50 human prisoners were chained in the cargo hold, starving and beaten and covered in wounds from Valkyrie torture. And among them was a teenage boy named Eric, who looked up at his rescuers with eyes that had seen too much horror. Are you real? He whispered as Maya cut his chains. We are real, she promised. And we are taking you home. Eric clutched her arm with desperate strength. There are more of us, he said. They took the rest to the Valkyrie homeworld. Please. You have to save them. We will, Maya told him. I swear to you. We will not stop until every single prisoner is free. The rescued survivors were transferred to medical ships, where doctors worked around the clock to heal their wounds. And the stories they told about their captivity only strengthened the resolve of every human in the fleet. Nathan Pohl recovered from his injuries against medical advice, transferred to the Relentless, and offered his expertise to Captain Torres. I was the security chief on New Haven, he explained, and I saw how they fight, how they think, how they move. So if that knowledge can help bring our people home, then I need to be here. Torres accepted him immediately. We need everyone who can contribute, the captain said. And your experience is valuable. The final weeks of the pursuit took the fleet deep into Valkyrie space, past their outer colonies and defense stations. And everywhere they went, the humans demonstrated a terrifying truth that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. They would not stop. They would not negotiate. They would not show mercy to those who had shown none to their people. For every human vessel that the Valkyrie managed to destroy, 2 more arrived to take its place, drawn from distant postings across human territory by the call of Protocol 17. And the enemy fleet that had once numbered 12 powerful warships was now reduced to just 4 damaged survivors limping toward their homeworlds. Arax stood on the bridge of his flagship and stared at the tactical display showing the human fleet closing in from all sides. Why do they not stop? He asked, his voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. Why do they keep coming no matter what we do? His officers had no answer, because they had never faced an enemy like this before. An enemy who counted their losses and continued forward anyway, who measured victory not in ships destroyed but in prisoners rescued, who refused to accept any outcome except complete success as the fleet reached the edge of Valtteri space. Torres received a communication request from the enemy flagship commander Xyrax appeared on screen. His scales dull with stress and his yellow eyes haunted by the nightmare he had created. "Human commander," he said, "I wish to negotiate terms for ending this conflict." Torres looked at the alien who had ordered the destruction of New Haven, who had murdered 1,800 innocent people and enslaved 300 more. And he felt nothing but cold determination. "There is only one term," Torres replied. "Release the prisoners and surrender yourself to face justice before the Galactic Council. And if you refuse, we will continue this hunt until nothing remains of your fleet or your empire." Xyrax stared at him in silence. "Searching for weakness and finding none, you would pursue us forever?" he asked. "We would pursue you across every galaxy in the universe," Torres confirmed. "For as long as it takes and at whatever cost we must pay, because that is what it means to be human." The communication ended, and Torres turned to his crew. "Prepare for the final assault," he ordered. "We finished this at their homeworld," and the fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying the weight of New Haven's dead toward the reckoning that awaited at the end of the hunt. The Valtteri homeworld hung in space like a green jewel surrounded by defense platforms and orbital stations. And Commander Xyrax believed that these defenses would finally stop the relentless human pursuit that had followed him across 4 galaxies. He was wrong, Captain. Torres did not order an immediate attack when the human fleet arrived, for he was not interested in destruction for its own sake. And instead, he positioned his ships in a perfect blockade formation that sealed every route in or out of the system. Nothing enters and nothing leaves. He announced to his fleet, "We will wait as long as necessary." The blockade began, and within weeks the Valtteri economy started to collapse as trade ships could not reach their destinations and supply convoys were turned back by human patrols. And the common people of the Empire began to understand that their leaders had brought disaster upon them all. The High Command ordered Xyrax to break the blockade. But every attempt failed against human defenses that seemed to anticipate every move. And slowly the realization spread that this war could not be won through force. In his quarters aboard the crippled flagship, Sub-Commander Tessic made a decision that would change the course of history, contacted a group of officers who shared his concerns. Soldiers who had watched their empire march toward destruction under the leadership of fools. And together they formed a plan to save what remained of their civilization. "The humans do not want conquest," Tessic explained to his conspirators. "They want justice, and they want their people returned. So if we give them what they want, perhaps we can end this nightmare." The others agreed, for they had seen enough death and wanted no more. Tessic managed to send a secret communication to the human fleet. And when Captain Torres received the message, he listened carefully to the proposal. "I can deliver the prisoners," Tessic promised. "All 243 survivors, including the children. And in exchange, I ask only for safe passage for myself and those who help me." Torres consulted with Admiral Patterson back on Earth, and the answer came quickly. "Accept the offer," Patterson ordered. "The prisoners are our priority above all else." The exchange was arranged for neutral ground, a small moon between the human blockade and the Valtteri defenses, and Dr. Claire Reyes was among the medical team that waited anxiously for the transport to arrive when the doors opened and the first prisoners emerged. Claire felt tears streaming down her face as she rushed forward to help them. And one by one, the survivors of New Haven were carried to safety, their long nightmare finally ending. Eric was among them, the teenage boy who had told Lieutenant Maya Chun about the others. and he collapsed into her arms, sobbing with relief when he saw her waiting for him. "You came back," he whispered. "You really came back. I promised," Maya replied. "And humans keep their promises, with the prisoners safely aboard human vessels." Captain Torres sent a final communication to Commander Xyrax. "The time for negotiation is over," Torres said. "You have 2 choices remaining, and I suggest you consider them carefully." "What choices?" Xyrax demanded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Surrender yourself to face trial before the Galactic Council for crimes against humanity, or watch as we systematically destroy every military installation in your empire until nothing remains." The High Command screamed at Xyrax to fight, to die with honor rather than submit to these inferior creatures. But as Xyrax looked at the tactical display, showing his shattered fleet and his blockaded world, something inside him finally broke. "I surrender," he said quietly, and the words tasted like ashes in his mouth. The trial took place in the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council, the same room where Ambassador Morith had delivered his ignored warning, and representatives from 100 species watched as the evidence of Velthor crimes was presented for all to see. Footage from the attack on New Haven played on the massive screens, showing the bombardment of civilian homes and the murder of innocents. And when it was finished, the chamber fell into horrified silence. Laura Marsh was given the opportunity to speak, and she stood before the assembly with the quiet dignity of someone who had lost everything but found the strength to continue. "I am not here to ask for vengeance," she said, her voice steady and clear, "because vengeance will not bring back my husband or the 1,800 others who died that day. But I am here to ask for one thing." She looked directly at the council members, her eyes holding theirs without flinching. "I ask that you remember this day and ensure that no other family suffers what mine has suffered. Because if this warning is heeded, then perhaps some good can come from all this pain." The council delivered its verdict swiftly, for the evidence was overwhelming and the crime was unforgivable, and the Velthori Empire was placed under strict sanctions. That reduced their military to a small defensive force and required them to pay reparations to the survivors of New Haven for generations. Takama Xyrax was sentenced to imprisonment for the remainder of his natural life, and as he was led away in chains, he passed Sub-Commander Tessek, who had been granted immunity for his role in freeing the prisoners. Their eyes met briefly, and Xyrax saw no triumph in his former subordinate's gaze, only sorrow for all that had been lost. 1 year later, a young alien commander stood in the council chamber receiving his first briefing before deployment to the Outer Rim. An Ambassador Morith approached him with the same data crystal he had once offered to Xyrax. "There is a warning you must hear," the old diplomat began, "about a species called humans." The young commander listened carefully, and when Morith finished speaking, he asked the question that Xyrax should have asked: "Why are they so dangerous?" Morith played the historical footage, not just from the Coven War now, but also from the hunt across galaxies that had brought the mighty Velthori to their knees. And the young commander watched in growing understanding. "They are not the strongest species," Morith explained. "Not the oldest, not the most advanced, but they have something that no other civilization possesses." "What is that?" "They never stop," Morith said simply. "When you attack their people, they remember. And they come for you no matter how far you run or how long it takes, because to them, every life matters enough to fight for." The young commander nodded slowly, and when he departed for his assignment, he carried with him a deep respect for the small creatures from the edge of the galaxy, far away on Earth. Captain Ryan Torres stood before a memorial wall where the names of the New Haven victims were carved in stone, and he found Daniel Marsh's name among the 1,800 others who had given their lives. He placed a small stone beneath the name, an ancient human tradition of remembrance that promised the dead would not be forgotten. A message appeared on his communicator from Admiral. Patterson informing him that a new threat had emerged in the Andromeda sector and the relentless was needed. Torres looked up at the stars one last time, thinking about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of predators who saw weakness where there was strength. And he smiled because he knew the truth that the rest of the universe was still learning humans were survivors, protectors and hunters when they needed to be. And the warning would echo across the galaxies for 1,000 years to come. Though not attack the humans, they will hunt you across the galaxies, and they will never stop.